You're watching a screencast of the STEM Funders Network. My name is Rich Rosen, and I'm going to be taking you on a tour of the SFN Observatory today. We'll start by talking about the design of the overall STEM Funders Network and how it maps to this particular website called the Observatory. We'll talk about how the concierge team uses this website, a bit about its basic layout and the blogs and the web pages, and then we'll go into some examples, and finally we'll talk about some questions. The STEM Funders Network is designed around the idea of a rotunda and innovation rooms. The rotunda is where free-form conversations can take place among the members about things they're interested in, around topics of The STEM Funders Network is designed around two core ideas. A rotunda, where the members can talk about ideas of common interest, suggest new topics, and just query each other for more information and knowledge about the landscape in STEM. When there is a topic of specific interest, it becomes a much more concentrated conversation in what we call innovation rooms. Currently, our specific topic is the next generation science standards and how we can make some degree of progress and assistance in preparing teachers through some collective action. This idea of the STEM Funders Network was mapped into a virtual meeting place called the SFN Observatory. The overall rotunda idea was mapped into a rotunda for blogs and posts inside of the observatory. You can find the observatory at www.stemfundersnetwork.org, and members of the concierge team can make sure that you have login and passwords if you don't already have them. Primarily, the tool of the SFN Observatory is used by the concierge team. Specifically, we use it to keep track of threaded conversations in somewhat of a virtual laboratory where we can archive web content, keep track of threaded conversations, and use the power of blogging, posts, and links as a way to collect information wherever it may exist. In addition, you as members have the opportunity to visit the site whenever you'd like to. It's a way to keep track of the pulse of the conversations, and you can more deeply engage and comment on the blogs and posts whenever you'd like to. Specifically, there is also a way to find out what's going on in the observatory without having to visit it all the time, and that's to use the email notification system that's in place. It allows you to see whether there have been posts inside of a specific innovation room like the Next Generation Science Standards, and to see specific pieces of research that may have taken place. And now what I'd like to do is to take you on a tour of the observatory itself, a little bit about its layout, and some examples of what you'll find in here. You'll log into the STEM Funders Network by going to www.stemfundersnetwork.org. You'll have a password and a username like other websites. Once you log in, you'll immediately land in the rotunda. This is where you'll find the most current conversations, whether they are posts by Angie about this week's activities via email or other exchanges that members may be having, or other things that the members or the concierge team think are conversations of interest to our SFN in general. You'll also find that the organization of the observatory is around agendas, innovation rooms, process guidelines, information about our members, and general research. The research button itself will take you to a threaded conversation that has information that we've been picking up that we think may have relevance to the overall conversations that are taking place in the innovation rooms, or information that members have identified as knowledge that they want to gain a little bit more deeper insight into. As an example, you might find things like technology trends around education technology being used in third world countries that might relate to personalized learning right here in the United States. Or you may find more specific, deeper dive information around the way teachers are viewing the Common Core State standards. You can always return to the rotunda and find information of specific interest. For example, you can go to agendas to see what's happening in the upcoming schedule for the STEM Funders Network. You can find information about prior meetings. Next, let's take a look at the innovation rooms themselves. The innovation rooms are the places where the concentrated conversations of the STEM Funders Network take place, the projects of the STEM Funders Network. We have a number of open rooms, 4 at this point in time, but we could have an infinite number. And specifically, we have one active room called the Next Generation Science Standards. If we enter that particular innovation room, we'll find more concentrated conversations around items of interest to the Next Generation Science Standards. Some of these are specifically related to the Next Generation Science Standards. Some of them might be pieces of information that we believe will be relevant to the Next Generation Science Standards, perhaps associated with teacher professional development or other types of problems that we are hearing more about as the NGSS becomes more prominent. As an example, let me take you to a specific topic called crowdsourcing to curate. This is an area of specific interest to me, and it's the use of a particular technology that you may be familiar with if you are using an application called Pandora or some other iTunes Genius, something like that, that allows you to listen to a piece of music and then find other pieces of music that are like that. Well, the folks who use that particular technique have also applied a technique similar to that to take a look at education videos to see whether similar types of tagging and genomic types of characterization could be used to understand more deeply why one particular education video might be similar to another. This would be specifically useful if I, as a teacher, found, for example, a video from Khan Academy to be very influential to my students, and now what I'd like to do is to find more videos like that. So in this particular case, the folks at Nomia have attempted to take education videos and break them down into their component parts, much like the Music Genome Project. And this particular post that I've put into the Next Generation Science Standards Innovation Room is about what's been learned from Nomia. Now we can return from here back to the project room. We held a webinar with experts in the Next Generation Science Standards from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, from Achieve, and from Portland State University. Here you'll find a recap of that webinar, and you can go to specific speakers of interest. For example, listening to Stephen Pruitt from Achieve talk about the use of the science standards and what's different about these science standards from traditional science instructional approaches.
And typical state standards, we see distinguish, describe, distinguish, recognize, identify. Those are pretty low-level cognitive verbs. And distinguish between atoms and molecules is another one. So they have to be able to point to something that's just a circle and say, oh, that's an atom. Oh, that has several circles. It must be a molecule. Versus in the NGSS, where students are going to be required to construct and use models to explain, plan investigations to generate evidence, use a simulation or mechanical model to determine, construct an argument that explains.
So there's an example of how we capture and organize these webinars to make it easier for our members to find very specific pieces of information that may be useful to their own work. We can return to the Rotunda at any point in time by clicking the Rotunda button. Now let's take a look at meeting the members. All of the current members of the STEM Funders Network can be found and their websites can be easily accessed. Further, if you want to see an overall word cloud of all of the information from each of the websites and from the annual reports, you can even take a look at that. So how does a piece of information make its way into the SFN Observatory? Well, the idea behind things in research here is not specifically to find academic papers or specific pieces of data or evidence, but research in the observatory can be tidbits or items of information that may come from another industry, that may come from allied industries. And our idea here is to bring research topics into the observatory for more specific conversations about them and how they might connect to the problems and the ideas that are being pursued by the SFN members. So how does something make its way here? Well, it's pretty simple. First, the idea is that if something exists somewhere else in the web, here's a particular site that I like a lot called edsurge.com. This is a sweeper site that looks specifically at education technologies. If we find something in this site that we think is interesting, for example, I'm interested in looking at personalized learning and adaptive learning, and as I'm perusing information and find something that looks to be of interest and maybe of interest to pass on to the members, or for us to catalog, I find something. And so here's a case where I find Newton. What I find interesting here is not only the style of things that they're looking at, but also that they have been successful at attracting more than $33 million of Series D funding by education investors. So in looking at their particular idea, we can read a bit more about it. Here's a white paper that they have described. We can take a look at that white paper. In the process of reading it, I come across something I think is of particular interest. I go to an easy button, post it to the SFN Observatory, add a reference, maybe a particular piece of graphics from that website, insert that image, go over to our observatory, decide that it should go into research, and then publish it. And then, going back to the observatory, that particular site and that particular piece of information that I extracted now finds its way to our research, and if you want to go back to the primary source, you just simply go to the link at the bottom. So it's that simple, and what's useful about this idea is that we can begin to collect information, place it into the observatory, and unlike trying to remember particular links or things I want to read about later, this places it in a location where we can have conversations, post information, blog about it, have a threaded conversation with all of you, and as we see more of this build up, we start to see connections between technologies that we may not have seen before that have relevance to the next generation science standards or other topics of interest to our members. Let's go now to process guidelines. The overall STEM Funders Network is guided not only by a rotunda and an idea of mixing the conversations and encouraging new styles of conversations to take place among our members, but also to use design and systems engineering as a way to think about how the projects can emerge. And so in the guidelines section are the areas of process and protocols that we as a concierge team have set up so that we can use these when projects emerge and as a way to help guide and facilitate conversations. The activities in a project room in design. So here you can see a video that I have recorded about how projects become projects. Two members agree to join and commit to participating in that project. And here you'll find process guidelines that document the ideas that we have behind how to facilitate and accelerate conversations into projects and activities of the STEM Funders Network. You can also find archived information about anything that we have published before. For example, in the December 2011 meeting, here's the report that was published at that time about preferences of the STEM Funders Network members at that time, what was of highest priority and what was of most importance. Now I've shown you some things about the interior of the observatory. What if you just want to visit and ask a question or send a comment? Well, there's a link in every page that you see in the observatory, and it will say something like, click here to send a comment to the concierge team. Or soon you will be finding one that says, click here to send a message to every STEM Funder Network member. And when you click that, you go to a post that's about comments and feedback. And this is the opportunity to send something to the attention of the team members. So here, I'll go ahead and ask a question. I might want to query to find out, has anyone seen specific data about the effectiveness of blended learning. I could submit that question, and now everyone has an opportunity to see the question, to comment, and if we've set this up so that you receive notifications whenever a question like this is asked, you'd see an email that says that a new question has been posted inside of the Rotunda. Finally, what I'd like to do is summarize some of the questions that came up during the Tour of Observatory webinar that we had during the period of September 4th through 7th. So the principal questions that were raised were about how best to do the notifications. As I mentioned earlier, notifications will happen when any new information is put into the observatory, whether that be a response to a post or a new screencast or a new post itself. Beyond that, some of the other questions related to what types of research and what types of topics we are mostly interested in as a concierge team as we're doing our STEM work on behalf of the network. And my answer to that was that we each have our own sort of standard haunts of places that we like to visit, like Ed Week and Ed Surge and varieties of other places like that. As an engineer, there are innovation places that I visit that I'm also trying to find ways that those correlate to the work of the STEM Funders Network. But we're also really interested and would encourage any members to post sites that you find of specific value, things that cause you to think provocatively, things that you want to try and introduce into the network itself as new ways of thinking for us as a collective. Those were the principal questions at the moment. This is a prototype, and as with prototypes, it will continue to change. We encourage you to send suggestions, ideas, improvements, and we'll continue to implement those over time.